differentiate between respiration and combustion, glycolysis and Krebs cycle, aerobic respiration and fermentation. So students, now let's learn about the differences between the following. The first one is respiration and combustion. So students, respiration. So here we can see the process of respiration includes breathing. Through the lungs we inhale oxygen and give out carbon dioxide, and this oxygen is transported by the circulatory system to the tissue, and the waste product, metabolic waste, that is carbon dioxide, which is produced from the tissue, will be collected by the circulatory system and again transported to the lungs, and through the lungs the carbon dioxide is given out. Now what happens to this oxygen once it reaches the cell? So as the oxygen reaches the cell, this oxygen will be utilized to break down glucose, and glucose is the nutrient, that is the food what we eat. So the food will be broken down in the presence of oxygen. So this process will give carbon dioxide, water and a lot amount of energy in the form of ATP. So this process is called respiration. So respiration is a biochemical process. So what did we learn here? So it is a biochemical process. The biomolecule, it is getting broken down to release energy, and for this enzymes are required. So in the presence of enzyme, this chemical reaction takes place. So we call this as biochemical process, and at the end of the process energy is formed, and the energy is formed in the form of ATP, and for this reaction to take place enzymes are required. So all these process is a controlled process, and therefore it is called as biochemical reaction or a biochemical process. So such biochemical reaction or cellular respiration occurs within a living cell. So this reaction cannot take place outside the body. So it can happen within the body. So for this respiration to take place, living cells are required. We can find this respiration in plant cell, animal cell. It is also seen in the yeast cell, etc. Now coming to the other one, combustion. So what happens in combustion? So in combustion, the substances get burnt, releasing heat and light energy. So here, energy is not obtained in the form of ATP, but the energy is released. It is not in the form of ATP what we see in a living cell, but large amount of light will be produced. So for this kind of reaction to take place, enzymes are not required. For example, when we burn a candle, what do we see? Heat is generated and the light is seen. So there some amount of energy will be released, but that energy, it is no useful for human beings. So it is not in the form of ATP. So this kind of reaction, it does not take place in the living cells. Externally we can see them. So burning a coal or burning a fuel. So all these are examples for combustion. So we call this process as physiochemical process. So here one form of energy is getting to another form. So it is called as physiochemical process, and such process need not require living cell. It takes place outside the living organisms. Energy is not produced, enzymes are not required, and these processes are uncontrolled process. So these are the differences between respiration and combustion. Okay. So now let's move on to the next difference, that is glycolysis and Krebs cycle. So students, now this respiration, cellular respiration, is further broken down into substages. So glycolysis and Krebs cycle comes under that. Now here we can see this is a part of a cell. Now this region is cytoplasm, and other cell organelles will be present. Since here only mitochondria is useful, we are showing only mitochondria, but other cell organelles will also be present. Now glycolysis is a linear pathway. So in this pathway, glucose will be converted to, this is 6 carbon compound glucose will be converted to 3 carbon compound called pyruvate. It's a linear reaction. It is not in the form of a cycle. So this path, glycolysis, will be a linear pathway. The place where it takes place is cytoplasm. So we can see, so this reaction is occurring in the cytoplasm. And in the aerobic and anaerobic respiration, the first part will be glycolysis. So it is a part of both aerobic and anaerobic respiration. So after pyruvate is formed in animal cell, it enters into the aerobic respiration. In certain bacteria, the pathway can take into anaerobic respiration. And the amount of energy produced will be in the form of NADH and ATP. So 2 NADH is formed and 2 ATP is formed. So glycolysis is a linear pathway. Now coming to the next one, Krebs cycle. The next stage will be the Krebs cycle. So you can see here the citric acid cycle, also called as Krebs cycle. It is cyclic in nature. So this pathway is cyclic pathway. So it is represented by a cycle, and the cell organelle is mitochondria. So the pyruvate which is formed during glycolysis enter into the mitochondria, where it takes part in the Krebs cycle. So the place where Krebs cycle takes place is the matrix of mitochondria. And here the final electron acceptor is oxygen. So it occurs only in the aerobic respiration. So the Krebs cycle will be absent in anaerobic respiration. The amount of energy produced will be NADH. So 6 NADH is formed, 2 FADH is formed, 2 ATP is formed. These are the differences between glycolysis and Krebs cycle. Now the next one is aerobic respiration and fermentation. So aerobic respiration we can see in plant cell and animal cell, where oxygen is used for deriving energy. So here in this reaction we can see the food is broken down in the presence of oxygen, and carbon dioxide and water is released as a waste product, and a large amount of ATP is produced. So end products are carbon dioxide and water. So totally 36 ATP molecules will be produced when one molecule of glucose is broken down. So here the glucose is completely oxidized. So completely oxidized because we can see here the end products are carbon dioxide and water. So that means no other intermediate compound is formed. So glucose will be completely oxidized. And this kind of aerobic respiration takes place, half occurs in the cytoplasm and the remaining part occurs in the mitochondria. So the complete glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm, and the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain occurs in the mitochondria. So there are two locations. It is a continuous process. So half takes in the cytoplasm and the remaining occurs in the mitochondria. So this is about aerobic respiration. Fermentation. So fermentation happens in the absence of oxygen. So here oxygen is not required. And the place where fermentation occurs is, it occurs in the cytoplasm. No cell organelles is required for this. So the entire reaction takes place in the cytoplasm. Here the product glucose is incompletely broken down. It gives rise to ethyl alcohol and carbon dioxide. So an intermediate compound ethyl alcohol is formed. Therefore it is not completely oxidized. And only 2 ATP molecules are produced when compared to the energy. In case of aerobic respiration, 36 ATP are produced, but in fermentation, only 2 ATP will be produced. So here you can see 6 molecule glucose. First it breaks into glycolysis takes place, give rises to pyruvate 3 carbon compound, and this pyruvate is further broken down to ethanol, ethyl alcohol, and during which some carbon dioxide will be released. And all carbon is not completely removed from the glucose. So it is incompletely oxidized and energy is released in the form of ATP molecule. So these are the differences between respiration, combustion, glycolysis, Krebs cycle, aerobic respiration and fermentation.